Okay, so let's go ahead and make a little video. Alright? So, you know how sometimes in a alternative setting, need to get to alternative means to get to a conclusion? Alright. Well, because of the factor of, the whole having to virtually submit, obviously, considering the factor of, the video that Lehtos Law just released, Steve Leto, a law firm accidentally ended up going ahead and divorcing a couple because of clerical error, apparently. Two people with, the same last name. So, like, say, for example, me and the person I was formerly with, alright? So, let's say me and the person that I was formerly with, we were married, alright? And simultaneously, their brother and their brother's significant other were also married, alright? Now, the law firm itself represents the family unit, alright? So, not just the sister, not just the brother, we're talking the sister, the brother, the mom, the dad, everybody in the family, alright? Now, the brother goes ahead to get a divorce, alright? And ultimately it ends up going ahead and, accidentally, instead of finalizing the brother's divorce, it ends up going ahead and, finalizing the sister's divorce. Going ahead and forcing apart a marriage, with no say-so of the actual married parties. Alright? So the law firm, while wanting to deny that mistake, simultaneously had to go to the court and admit to that mistake because of understanding the amount of damage that mistake would end up making. And understand, everybody wants to go ahead and have the conversation of, respecting the sanctity of marriage. Well, simultaneously, nobody wants to, respect or accept respecting the need of divorce. Alright? So it's like, oh, marriage is a pact before God and everything. It's like, great. Glad that's a pact before God, for you. Ultimately, understand, if you look at it as there's no reason for divorce, go ahead, take some of your time, because you want to go ahead and talk and complain and debate about it and everything. Go ahead and take some of your time. Go volunteer at a domestic violence shelter. Alright? Take some of that time, take some of that privilege of being able to hold that position and hold that opinion. Just volunteer at a domestic violence shelter. Alright? Now keep in mind, when I say that, I don't mean go volunteer at a domestic violence shelter, go be nosy, go pry into, what ended up going ahead and causing the collapsing of these people's individual worlds. No, what that means is sit down, shut up, do something for someone other than yourself. Go volunteer at that domestic violence shelter, and then go tell me that you hold that same fucking opinion after you've gone and actually donated and volunteered some of your time at that domestic violence shelter with the mission of shutting your fucking mouth and opening your fucking ears. Alright? Because then you will understand why there is such a thing as divorce and why the sanctity of divorce should be respected just as much as the sanctity of marriage. Alright? And I want you to go ahead and point to one person, alright? Especially with people having the attitude of nobody would go ahead and take advice from you. Name to me one fucking person that would see that as bad advice. Alright? Because understand, for somebody that's been privileged enough to never have to endure abuse or have to wonder when they would end up getting out of it or where that light at the end of the tunnel actually ends up going ahead and being, they do not understand the position of privilege that they fucking stand in. Alright? So ultimately, you took some of that privilege as well as some of that time that you used to bitch and complain, and you take some of that time to do some good with it. Literally. You going and volunteering whatever task you're asked for, to assist with, you assist with. Alright? Anybody that's willing to open up about their story, shut the fuck up. Listen. Alright? The story It may not revolve around you, quite obviously, because you just came into their life and you're acting like a nosy busybody. But if you're acting like a nosy busybody for the sake of understanding and sensitivity, there are very few people that'll chastise you for that. You know? Learning for the sake of actual growth and intent of trying to become better than you were. I mean, if you ask me, that is definitively recidivism. Alright? So it doesn't matter how much of a fucking attitude that the person that's actively trying to go ahead and be an example of recidivism, stop trying to weaponize their past, alright? They already beat the fuck out of themselves all the time with it. You don't need to go ahead and do the job that they're already fucking doing on their own. If they're willing to go ahead and until they work through that moral wound that ended up getting implanted because of whatever role that they ended up being implicated on, regardless of the factor, if the only thing you were guilty of was being a fucking useful idiot. Alright? But check the position of privilege that you're in because of the factor that you're asking these people what their lived experience is. Ultimately, it's up to them if they want to go ahead and recall the nightmare that they survived, and ultimately if they want to share their story. And if they don't, shut the fuck up and stop trying to go ahead and coerce that out of people. Alright? For some people, the reason that their past lives in their past isn't because, trying to hide things, trying to pretend like changing everything. It's like, nah. That motherfucker back there is ruthless. Understand? Just as much as your trauma is telling you that you need to run away from that motherfucker, the factor that at once upon a time, I was that motherfucker, trust me, I understand. But ultimately, I'm trying to do what I can to be able to bring some order in the process of that chaotic scatter. Alright? Anyway, ultimately, people wanted to mock, be like, couldn't be a lawyer because of the fact that I went to an alternative school that was meant for people with learning disabilities, while simultaneously being like, you can't represent yourself. Funny thing is, I ended up going ahead finding holes in the laws and, laws and logic of the, the actual ordinance to be able to prevent the predatory debt collecting process, the process of a predatory civil asset forfeiture. Not to mention that, but ultimately, I ended up going ahead and pointing out the fact that a ticket should have been dismissed because my license got indefinitely canceled. Indefinitely. Alright? On a failure to appear. That failure to appear. Why didn't anyone appear? Because it was booked on Hanukkah. It was supposed to be an anti-Semitic fuck you. Alright? Now keep in mind, details about the accident. No vehicles to be able to show the actual impact, alright? 1987 GMC Jimmy. 76-inch height, clearance, alright? Going ahead and doing 50 and a 30, going and hitting head-on in a head-on collision. 2012 Scion XB. Alright, Scion XB completely stationary because of the fact that it was pointing towards an urgent care center, ultimately going and trying to accelerate, at such a expedient momentum, could have ended up going ahead and causing a trajectory slingshot that would have ended up going and sending the Scion directly into the urgent care center, while the urgent care center's security camera was directly pointed at the accident, while simultaneously, law enforcement wanted to go ahead and claim in the process of, trying to get the claim situated and all that apparently there was no video evidence to be able to recall. While simultaneously, it would end up being a breach of the law for that urgent care center to not have security cameras on the outside of their building. Alright? So obviously, they're going to have it pointed outside of their building in their, merging, to the parking lot. Because literally, it was merging point from both sides of the road, 2 lanes, for the actual entrance of the parking lot. And then one of the lanes turning left, to go ahead and merge the urgent care parking lot with the Dollar General parking lot, and the right lane for the actual entrance would have gone straight to the urgent care. Alright? Jimmy, 76 inches in clearing and height. Scion, 62.6 inches. Alright? The 1987 GMC Jimmy, person wanted to have evaluated at $28,000 with, keep in mind, That was the highest that I was able to go ahead and find on the internet that apparently has on, um, just under 64,000 miles. Now, keep in mind, you already know because of advertisement, the way you handle lemon law, you know the factor that technically they are allowed to go ahead and sell, as refurbished or, basically a restoration by going ahead and claiming, yes, this is how much miles that the vehicle does end up having, despite the fact of it being an old amount of vehicle. Legally, I am allowed to sell it to you without having to worry about it. I just have to practice the sort because of the factor that I'm clarifying to you the amount of miles that it's been since the installation of the brand new engine. We're not talking about the amount of miles that the vehicle as a whole actually ends up having on it. So legally, can go ahead and sell it at inflated, overcharged value, but have to go ahead and sell it as a classic restore. All right? And it's like, well, going ahead and doing that, my question is, why the hell would you go ahead and pay almost $28,000 for a, late 80s Jimmy that has almost 70,000 miles on it, when for that price you could go ahead and literally Googled up the, price of, what could be, God at the same time. And I clarified the fact that I could go ahead and buy a fully loaded 2020 Subaru Forester with just under 40,000 miles on it for, actually, I think it was $2,000 less. So, that being said, people were wanting to claim the factor that I ended up losing because between legal team, the person getting legal representation, as well as, wanting to go ahead and cancel my license, which, by the way, with the canceling my license and everything, like I said, they booked my court date for Hanukkah, an anti-Semitic fuck you, while also wanting to try to remove the racial aspect from the situation while not wanting to acknowledge that the court date was booked during Hanukkah. All right. Ultimately, how the hell would you have known if I was at the court date or not? The court was closed. All right. This is literally a circumstance of, prosecutorial misconduct. All right. So, wondering why the hell I shouldn't go ahead and, submit a Monell claim. And also, by the way, when it comes down to law aspirations, just so you know, there's always been a part of me that wanted to work in law. There was also a part of me that wanted to work in psychology. Always loved cars, always loved, working on automotives as well as going ahead and learning about everything involving them. So, I just need to say, as far as the Institute for Justice, and everything that you do, I just want to say I'd appreciate if you'd be willing to go ahead and call the attempt of running afoul, especially because of the factor that I ended up pointing out the 14th Amendment and 8th Amendment breach. Well, people have wanted to act like, I'd automatically end up losing the case while I pointed out to you the reason why somebody was wanting to go ahead and upcharge and force the sale of an 87 GMC Jimmy for almost $30,000. Well, simultaneously wanted to get my license suspended. Didn't want to go ahead and justify the insurance fraud that me testifying most certainly would have gone and exposed, and put on the record, on the docket for the court, should I had to go up and testify. And ultimately the amount between the bumper as well as the, brush grill, which keep in mind there was no damage to the brush grill, just the bumper. The bumper was $500. At the most, we are talking full estimation of how much the actual bumper is, but wanted to claim that the GMC was totaled because of the factor that the metal bumper ended up bending and just barely touching the threading of the tire, right? Didn't make any punctures in the tire, no, actual, penetration, just literally was touching it, all right? So we're talking, think of sibling rivalries, think of the, I'm not touching you, I'm not touching you, It's like that. All right. So ultimately, the tire still would have been able to move, and ultimately, with a caulk gun, been able to use as pretty much a portable C-clamp or vise, would have been able to give enough leverage to bend that metal bumper far enough away from the actual wheel that the person would have been able to go ahead and drive their vehicle away from the scene of the accident. So we're not even talking about total. We're talking they literally would have been able to drive away from the scene of the accident, and we are talking as far as the amount that the cost of repairs would have ended up being, it would have cost nothing to anybody. But he didn't even want to have a conversation. You know? Well, this situation, I feel kind of robbed because I don't know if you could tell, but people wanted to discourage me for representing myself while simultaneously be pointing out, I'm like, hey, so when it comes to the Consumer Financial Protection Act, as well as the, Federal Debt Collection Act, ultimately somebody else wanting me to do their job for them and then being upset that they weren't able to Huckleberry Finn me and to give them the information, despite the factor, on a contractual basis, I did the fucking job. I'm just not going to go ahead and hand the job over to somebody else to get the credit for after I did all the work. Well, simultaneously, somebody wanted to act like I didn't do the work with me pointing out that I could go ahead and tell the details of this circumstance. Now that enough time has worked to try to brush off some of the trauma that the initial impact and shock that it had me in, I'm able to, if you couldn't tell, meticulously put my case together and explain every detail with the actual dimensions, the physics aspect as far as torque, trajectory, velocity, and ultimately it's one of those circumstances that, for me personally, I wouldn't have had to argue my case. They would have been arguing against me. They would have been arguing against the laws of physics. Good luck getting them to be willing to, work and, be a little pliable, Be willing to compromise with physics. Physics doesn't give a fuck, all right? If anything, the funny thing is, when it comes down to the laws of physics, the one thing that we've gotten to learn as long as the subject has been around is that do not assume that you know what physics laws are, all right? There's eventually going to be a point in time where physics is going to go ahead and look at that point in history and be like, hey, remember when you were naive and gullible enough to believe that that was the case?